Good afternoon. Thank you for joining Metropolitan Community College for another program to honor Black History Month. I am Barbara Velasquez, Coordinator of International Intercultural Education. I'm looking forward to another inspiring presentation, followed by questions and answers. Your microphones are silenced. Please use the chat function to send communications and questions to any of the hosts. Send your questions to moderator Dr. Dale Geins at any time during the lecture. He will present questions to our speaker after her presentation. Also, watch the chat for a link to an online evaluation. We appreciate your feedback. Our thanks to Dr. Dale Geins, the lead community development advisor for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, Omaha branch, for collaborating with us today. Dr. Geins specializes in small business, particularly entrepreneurship-led development. His most recent work is the Small Business Owners of Color Recovery Guide. Co-authored with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, it shares ways communities can support small businesses of color working to recover from the pandemic. Geins joined the Kansas City Fed in 2011. He began his career in banking, then managed a small profit business incubator. After that, he worked for Habitat for Humanity and then ran a small nonprofit healthcare organization. Dr. Geins received his master's in business administration from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, a master's in finance from Bellevue University, and in 2021 received his Ph.D. from the University of Nebraska, Omaha's College of Public Administration. He is a commissioner on Nebraska's inaugural African American Commission and serves on the Equitable Economic Development Committee for the International Economic Development Council. Please welcome Dr. Dale Geins, who will introduce our speaker and moderate the question and answer session.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you today and listen to this phenomenal presentation we're about to have from Dr. Odawali. I got a chance to, chat on our pre-call and, read a little bit more about her. And it's going to be a unique take on something that we traditionally look at as an economic, venture, as well as a historical massacre that had occurred. But I think she's going to approach it from kind of a unique view. So I'm really interested in hearing, what she has to say. Before I read her bio, and I'm going to read the whole thing because it's so awesome. I did just toss in the chat something me and our branch exec from Oklahoma City branch. So for those not familiar with the Federal Reserve Bank, we are the central bank for the United States. We're responsible for monetary policy across the US, and we're broken into 12 regional banks. And so I'm with the Kansas City Fed, even though I actually live right up the street from Metro, Fort Campus, and I work off 2201 Farnham Street. So, I'm from your community. But we wrote this article back during the 100-year commemoration of the massacre from an economic lens, and we talked about Black Wall Street, past, present, and future. So if you want to check that out, check it out. The reason I'm excited for Dr. Odawali's presentation is because traditionally, someone who does economic development and entrepreneurship, we tend to filter everything through the lens of the economic power of Black Wall Street. And while I'm sure she's going to touch on some of that, I'm very interested in the sociological, anthropological aspect that she's going to bring to the table of this. And so without further ado, I'm going to read her bio and just let her get to it. So Dr. Odawali is a Tulsa native who graduated from Booker T. Washington High School in 2006 and received her Ph.D. from the University of Tulsa in 2016. She's the great-grandniece of Robert Ware, who attended Dunbar Grade School and survived the Tulsa Massacre in 1921. She is now an assistant professor of anthropology at Tulsa, specializing in African diaspora archaeology. Isn't that so cool? African diaspora archaeology in the Caribbean and Southeastern United States, with a theoretical focus on community-centered, restorative justice, anti-racist, and Black feminist archaeology. Since 2014, she's been researching archaeological sites related to Afro-Caribbean heritage in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, but continues to research sites of Black heritage in her home state of Oklahoma. Her latest research project, based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, works alongside other local Tulsans to reanalyze historical evidence from the aftermath of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, launched new community-based archaeological investigations in the historic Greenwood district, and used radical mapping techniques to visualize the impact of the massacre throughout time on the landscape of Greenwood. Her research has received awards and support from the American Anthropological Association, the National Science Foundation, the Society of Historical Archaeology, the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission, the Tulsa Community Foundation, and the Digital Archaeological Archive of Comparative Slavery. In addition to her role as faculty, she also serves as the Director of Historical Archaeology and Heritage Studies Laboratory at the University of Tulsa, and serves as the co-creator of the Estates Little Princess Archaeological Field School in St. Croix that trains students in archaeological methods and other STEM-related skills. I told you it was super dope. So without that, I'm going to introduce you to the awesome Dr. Odawali, and I'm going to turn off my mic and my camera and just listen to the presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me, Barbara, extending that invitation, and to all of you who advocated for me to come to the school virtually and share what I do.
Phenomenal presentation. That interactive map is something special right there, because even, you know, going through my studies of it, you don't get the sense of proximity and how everything is, you know, located next to each other. You know, you kind of read about it historically, and it's just kind of like a story. You don't really see the reality of it from a block to block perspective and what really happened. So that's great. We're not going to be able to get through all of them, but here's another book by your guy, Hannibal B. Johnson, Acres of the Aspiration, that I just pulled off my bookshelf. So a couple questions I want to get to real quick, just because we're time sensitive now, and I'm gonna kind of cherry pick them. So the first one is, what did the president of the U.S., local government, national government do to address the situation at the time?
The president?
Just the general government, national government, state government as a whole.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Well, we could talk about the president, or we could talk about the city. The city, in terms of our city leaders that are microcosms of the larger government, they blamed Black people for burning down their own community. That's been the narrative that we are fighting against the hardest.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that, and you touched on it, that I found just absolutely appalling, is not one white person was convicted in that whole process. A major historical tragedy. So approximately how many businesses actually rebuilt? And do you have a sense of how many are still in existence today, passed through the family?
Ooh, okay. So let's start with the number of rebuilt businesses. We don't have a full record of how many businesses rebuilt. Some of them changed their name, some of them changed locations, some of them, you know, they're making decisions based on what materials they had access to, all the financial decisions the family had to make. But also, we are in a space where people are trying to lay low. So some of them didn't, they may have moved what was a standalone structure into someone else's structure, like I mentioned. So you may not be recording, you know, this whole building as 5 different shops.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Records.
That's a good point. So like kind of that community collaboration, because you suspect that those that stayed really had to rally around each other.
Oh yeah.
Because, you know, even in the aftermath, you know, I'm sure there was it was still hot down there, you know.
Yes.
So where was that other one I wanted to get to? So what does the area look like now? How in general does Tulsa feel about Greenwood?
Well, I don't know how Tulsa feels, but for a lot of the people that are in Greenwood today, there's a lot of frustration, a lot of there's still an ongoing battle. I'll say that, because right now there's not a Black-owned business left on Greenwood today. It is primarily white-owned. And there's been a lot of gentrification, a lot of encroachment from downtown, and a lot of relabeling parts of Greenwood as downtown. So that's why our map is so important, because we're literally redrawing the boundaries of this district to say that, no, this is not downtown. This has always been part of Greenwood, and here's the map to prove it.
Yeah, well, you know, when I was down there, because the thing I mentioned, I went to go down there every now and then for work, and it's pretty. I mean, like they did a good job cosmetically of the area, but to your point, like the sense of this is a Black owned area, I did not get. You see the signs and the banners everywhere, but that sense of community, I didn't see or feel that at all.
Yeah, all the businesses there that you saw are renting. They're renting space in their district. It's crazy.
Here's a good one. What was the media reaction to the riot? Were Black newspapers successful in disseminating African information or accurate information to the nation?
It was a mixed bag, because you have the loudest newspapers, again, perpetrating that same stereotype, that same myth of Black people rioting, burning down their own community, and that being perpetuated over and over again. So it's like the lie goes around the world 2 times before the truth has a chance. So by the time while the Black newspapers are trying to share the truth, these white circulating papers are louder and repeating themselves far more often. So that myth really takes hold, and it becomes the riot.
And it hasn't changed.
We're
still doing a lot of the same things. Yeah.
Yes.
That's which actually leads me into another good question, because we got time for probably 2 more. And this one is the one around trauma. And I'm going to kind of slightly modify it. But she asked, how do African Americans consider historical trauma within communities that are becoming gentrified, and what can they do about it? But let's not make it so broad, because that's a big question.
Yeah.
I'm to kind of tee off that question. What did you learn about trauma, collective trauma and recovery from you doing this project?
Ooh.
I'm gonna say Black trauma. Let me qualify that.
Yes, for Black trauma, I have learned the importance of balance, that you cannot just focus on Black death and Black trauma and still be okay yourself as someone who is steeped in researching about this and learning about these stories. You have to have that angle of resilience, focusing on not just trauma and what happened to them, but how did they respond? How did they overcome? How did they rebuild? And sort of see life in those stories. That's what's been the most important and most like saving grace for me, where I would not be able to do this.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, and I'm glad you really lifted that up, because when I first learned about Black Wall Street, and I'm sure a lot of others, we learned about that singular moment in time. We didn't learn about Gurley and the innovation and how they pulled that together, and how fast they were able to develop something we still talk about today. Nor do we learn about the rebuilding process that occurred up into predominantly urban renewal and integration. And so it's almost like the nation likes to build monuments to our pain, but never what we do in response positively. So I'm really glad you lifted that up. And then the last question is, how can someone or groups that are interested in supporting the project get involved?
I love that question. One, there is a whole group of archaeologists like me in the Society of Black Archaeologists that are working today to lift up sites across the African diaspora. Greenwood is one, but there's lots of work that we're doing as archaeologists around that. And 2, there's a ongoing sort of mission. Survivorstock.org is a website, and this is a foundation that's led by descendants of survivors. And they have started this foundation, Survivor Stock, to raise money for scholarships for other youth, and specifically prioritizing youth from descendants, so they could go to whatever college they want to. That's the dream. And their educational access is not limited by what happened to them in terms of their family generational losses. So that's been a really ongoing mission that I'm proud to support in any way I can. So anytime I hear people say, what can I do? I mention that a lot. But also come to Tulsa, come visit. Come see what this is all about, and that we're still here. We never left.
And I apologize. I was like, oh, we got to get off at 1:30 to 1:45. So we can actually, we could have some good conversations now. So here's more of a personal question that was asked. You mentioned how Cecilia Palmer, how she changed her life. And by the way, you're the first Black archaeologist I've ever met. So
Really?
yes, you are. So I think that's exciting.
You know what?
Great
I'm actually not
representation.
surprised because out of all the archaeologists working in the country, less than 1% identify as Black. That's the latest statistic we have.
Yeah,
And that we got to
well,
change that.
and being a PhD, it really shrinks the field. So I think it's phenomenal that you're out showcasing this work and showing, how you can make it, culturally sensitive and thoughtful and really uncover stories that have been marginalized and left out. So definitely kudos to you. But back to Cecilia Palmer, and you talked about her paving the way to the University of Tulsa. How do you feel she changed your life otherwise? Did you get to meet her family members, or otherwise learn about her life?
She died before I was even born.
Ooh.
So she died in 1980. I was born in 1987, so I never got a chance to meet her. But I know that for one, of course, she's a survivor. But two, she applied to TU as a student and got denied because of her race. So being the resilient woman that she was, she went and got a degree elsewhere at Langston and came back and taught at University of Tulsa and opened the way for so many other Black students that would not have had access to that school otherwise. And my God, she's just the GOAT. And she started one of the first Black sororities on campus as well. So she was an AKA.
That's amazing. And I love hearing about those unsung heroes. Usually there's so much people doing good stuff at the community level, regional level, that have regional, local, and then off the national influence, and we never hear about them. Our stories are just not told, I feel, in the way they should be.
Reach.
So last year we saw in the news that Manhattan Beach was returned to the descendants of Willa and Charles Bruce. Is there any effort, and this may go into the reparations conversation, is there any effort to return Black Wall Street to its descendants?
For that, I would like to lift up another local hero, Vanessa Hall Harper. She is our city councilor and city council chair person for District 1, and that is the district that Greenwood is encompassing. She fought for over a decade just for us to get a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond that, we have been advocating for reparations in money and land. And she has been on the forefront of that fight since day one. But I would say that we are a far cry away from getting that level of reparation to what we would like, but we have been seeing sort of incremental changes because of like the relentlessness of our our Greenwood leaders, our leaders in Greenwood.
So can you talk this is not a question posed, but just kind of riff off of that. Can you talk a little bit about the sense that the pushback? I mean, I've heard arguments for reparations in general, but this one seems to be much more appropriate at the local level because there's a much more clear line between this happened, this was the consequence, we still have survivors. So what have you heard that has been kind of some of the pushback?
The pushback runs the gamut because there's still people denying the massacre happened. There's still people denying it wasn't.
Wait. Can I pause? Can we back up on that one? You said there's still people denying what all of this historical documentation is showing happened. Mm-hmm. What do they say? What do they? How do they? What? I can't even ask that question. I mean, explain that to me.
Okay. There's one quote that was written down. So back in 2002, our mayor at the time, mayor of the city, he was asked directly what he thought about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And he said, "I've never heard of that. Is that when a Black person refused to get off the sidewalk for a white person and a Black person got mad and I think they burned down some things, but that's all that happened. There was no Tulsa Race Massacre." This was the mayor.
Wow.
So we still have a battle to even get people to acknowledge that this happened. We are still battling once we get over that hurdle of let's acknowledge that we're on the same page, that this happened, the magnitude, and what is your responsibility in this? So there are a number of hurdles we have to now jump, and we're still jumping.
Do you feel that some of that lack of knowledge is a willful ignorance, because to acknowledge and to fully acknowledge, I mean, because people can partially know, but to fully acknowledge requires a level of accountability to that knowledge. And so it's almost like they're pushing the knowledge of it away so that they don't have to be accountable to what their response would be to it.
Yeah, in my opinion, I believe that is definitely a big part of it. Also, people believe their family stories, staunchly. So if you grew up hearing something over and over again, that's cemented in your mind as fact. And so to try and unseat that fact becomes even harder. That's why we have a lot of problems with misinformation today. People in different circles accepting misinformation and accepting that as fact. And it's hard to unlearn something that you see as a complete part of your belief system.
And this next question kind of dovetails into that. And I'm going to preface it by my experience when we were working on Greenwood work and having conversations. And a lot of folks, older individuals say that they never learned about it in high school, never learned about it in college. These are Black folks from Tulsa. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that dovetails into the question, which asks, my understanding is it took over 30 years for the country to become aware of the massacre. What do you think brought the Tulsa Massacre to the history books, or for lack of a better term, to a broader level of public consciousness?
Well, I know exactly what happened. So from 1921, we have really from 1921 to the 1970s, we have this culture of silence that is kind of seated on our community. One, for self-preservation, because like I said, no one is held accountable. The people that did this still walking the streets, looking at everybody, like threatening to do it again, threatening to finish the job. The KKK is now emboldened and grown 10 times in its size. And you have the fact that in this space, as Black people, there are things happening all across the country. Red Summer, all these things are happening across the country. So this fear of speaking up, it's a trauma. It's a trauma response to self-preserve. But it's also, it was people like Don Ross. And Don Ross, he was elected to the Oklahoma House of Representatives in 1982. And he wrote a magazine article in 1971 that really kind of broke open the story. But then he also, in his position as a state representative, he started the Tulsa Race Riot at the time commission. And that commission was that sparked a lot of new testimonies coming forward, a lot of new survivors coming forward. If it wasn't for that commission, we probably wouldn't know as much as we do about the massacre today. And he's also, I just want to shout out Don Ross because he's still living. And he also was the first to advocate for that Dixie flag to be taken down and a Confederate statue to be taken down from the state capital, Oklahoma City. So we were the first state in the nation to take down a Confederate statue in front of our Capitol building because of Don Ross.
Oh, that's phenomenal. And it's always it seems like those singular actors that push it until they get folks. And that's to my students out there. You can make a difference. You can Absolutely. Make an impact. I'm going to combine two questions into one. Okay. One is a pop culture, and another is about the centennial, but I'm gonna mash them into one. So the first one is, I just finished watching HBO series Watchmen, which directly addresses this event and its trauma. And I was curious if you had seen it, and if so, what's your thoughts? And then I'm going to add the second one around the centennial, because this is both about the same time period. Did the centennial recognition last year that made national news help with the recognition process and more inclusion in US history? So kind of this pop culture and then this national kind of recognition type of deal. What are your thoughts on the pop culture first and then the centennial?
Okay, let me tackle the pop culture. So I'll say that it helped spread awareness, but not long-term meaningful change in our city. Because what typically happened across the centennial year, there were 10 documentaries are being made about us. But then that media team packs up and leaves once they're done with their little movie, and we never hear from them again. There's no long-term investment into the community. So after the centennial, everyone is now on to the next bandwagon. We're left still doing the work. So it's like, how do we get, more eyes on the story, but also more feet to move. That's where we really want to see change happening. So for what was the second part of the question?
It's just a combination of kind of pop culture and then the centennial, both kind of these public awareness and kind of how it impacted.
So to give you an example, President Biden, he came to town, said, this is a massacre, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, okay, nice, you're acknowledging us. But the Secret Service, they left all this tape and trash all over my site that I had to clean up. And it caused us, we had to delay a day in our excavation because of that. So it's like, not only are y'all just blowing in and out of town, but y'all aren't really thinking about your impacts while you're here.
Yeah, so it becomes one of those, I call it cosmetic diversity and inclusion things.
Yes.
Yeah. Where it's very, very superficial. Yeah. Not saying that was the president's intent, but we've seen historically how people will use some of these critical historical moments kind of to amplify themselves instead of really empower the local community to create change. But it brings me back to kind of this transition from riot to massacre. And I think this goes into some of the languaging around, Black events, where historically when we say riot, we presume that it's a Black thing. But in a lot of those situations back in the 1920s, in that period, there were tons of riots, and most of them were led by white people against Black communities, Greenwood being one of them. So talk a little bit about, if you can, the transition from the narrative of it being a riot to the narrative of what was more accurate, I consider, which is massacre. And how did you personally see that evolution occur?
So I think for me, it's a different evolution that's occurring because I don't typically, whenever I'm writing about this, researching about this, I use different language. I call it an attack because I am speaking to the fact that this was, in my belief, premeditated and orchestrated, methodical, and organized more than a riot, so to speak. And also, a massacre is too passive for what happened here. This was an attack that was orchestrated, and then a community that fought back with everything it had. So there are people that call it a war, there are people that call it a pogrom, a mass lynching, like I said. There are lots of different terms. So I don't know if we've made an evolution to just one word, but we've at least moved off the fact that people seeing this as a Black, like you're saying, led riot where they're burning down their own community. And that's not what happened here. So whatever term people call it, as long as they're acknowledging the real impetus here, the real cause, and what really sparked this, and who is doing the burning. Like, it doesn't matter what you call it. Let's just call it a spade. But it's got to be acknowledging, like, who are the people doing harm here, and it wasn't us. We were trying to defend ourselves.
Yeah,
I should just mention that the search for mass graves, I'm also a part of that. I'm just not leading that, so I don't like to mention it because there's so many wonderful people doing work on that project. But and I'm just one of 42 people that are involved in that work, but that's neither here nor there. But the acknowledging that the people that we've already found, we've identified 35 individuals. A lot of those individuals are children, and people have not been hearing about that. It has not been in the news. Yeah, they just are acknowledging that, yes, we found a mass grave, but y'all haven't seen a line of child-sized coffins. It still haunts me today. And these are the things that we have to really acknowledge. If we're thinking about what to call this, just remember that they're people at the end of the day.
Yeah, and then that's powerful. We're gonna wrap up. I did have a question while I'm wrapping up from someone, and they asked if you could put back up the list of books, if you still have your screen up, that you could share, because I don't believe this was a registered webinar. I don't think we have emails that we could send it out. But I think just to kind of put a summary on it. First of all, I mean, this is phenomenal. This is truly phenomenal. I'm so glad they invited me to kind of come and listen to you and have a chat with you.
You're a wonderful moderator.
Well, I'm just interested. I'm just having fun, right now. I just love this stuff. I mean, it's, and I think the way that you presented and shared it, I mean, I think really gives us a real feel for as much as you can from a 2021, 2022 now, I guess, over 100 years later, I feel like I have a much more empathetic sense of what that community went through at that time. And I'm hoping other people feel the same way, because this is a critical moment in history, and it happened in multiple communities. But I think symbolically, this is the one with the most notoriety to it. And so the better we can understand that, and the better we can take accountability for these kind of actions and figure out how to move forward from them, even 100 years later, the better we will be as a nation. And so before I kind of pivot away from you, I would love to just give you the last word that you would like, your participants to hear and know.
I just wanted to thank the people who lent their voices and their likeness to this project, all of my collaborators, the people that, the families of survivors that allowed me to speak and share their stories. And also, if you are wanting to learn more, you could definitely come to one of my shows with National Geographic Live, where we share an even deeper story about this massacre and my family story connected to this. So you could definitely come and check that out, or come to Tulsa.
Yeah, well, I'll be back down there as soon as I can. Now that the bank has started to let us travel a little bit more, and I told you that when I come down, we're gonna hang out if you're around.
Yes.
And so I think that's going to be awesome. Now I have to kind of conclude, with my moderator duties, and of course I want to thank the phenomenal Dr. Odawali. I think this has been a fascinating presentation, and hopefully to everyone in the presentations. Thank you to everyone who submitted the questions. Unfortunately, I could not get to them all, although I tried as best as I could. Hopefully you'll be able to do some more exploring of her fascinating work of Black Wall Street, Greenwood, Oklahoma, and the history around it. I encourage you to do so, and also in your own communities, because we have our own issues in North Omaha and the histories around various, historical trauma and, our rise as well. Also, please remember to complete the online evaluation. The link to the address is included in the chat function. And then we do have, and I say we, and I say that kind of because I did teach at Metro once, so I feel part of the family. So please join Metro Community College for the next program featuring Black History Tomorrow, which is Tuesday at February 8th at 10:30 Central. You will see a performance of chamber theater by the core ensemble entitled Unbought, that explores the lives of Ida B. Wells, Sally Hemings, and Sherry Chisholm. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Have a nice afternoon, and consider joining tomorrow's program. And with that, I will turn it back over to our tech support. And I appreciate you all for taking your time.
Thank you.